Great. Well, good afternoon, good evening, or good morning, depending where you are in the world. Really excited to have everyone here today. My name is Alan Bell. I'm a Senior Vice President at Equus Software based on the East Coast of the United States. And I am delighted to be joined today by two very distinguished panelists for this little session on simplifying remote work management through innovation. First of all, I'm going to introduce Rose Barber-Launch. Many of you know Rose, very well known in the mobility industry as being a pioneer and a leader, head of global mobility at Philip Morris International. And Rose, we're really glad that you're able to join us from London today. Even although it's raining and it's late at night, we really appreciate it. And then we also have Philippe Bastillon, who is the VP Global Total Reward at GfK. Just outside Munich. And Philippe, thank you for staying up late as well. We appreciate it. And, you know, I'm really excited. This is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. We work on the software side, obviously at Equus Software. When the pandemic happened, you know, we spent a lot of time pivoting straight to remote work for our entire organization. As software developers, it was relatively straightforward for us. We were able to do it with a computer, work from home. But I think like many other people, we struggled with, you know, what are all the implications of this? And, you know, in some ways, we're still struggling with that. I'm really interested to understand, you know, how both of you approached remote work and how you've managed to deal with that and explore that with you, and also maybe do a little bit of fortune telling and see where we think the path of remote work is going to go in the future. So with that, I just remind all the audience that if you do want to ask questions, please do so. You can type them into the chat, which I believe is at the bottom of your Zoom meeting, and we'll take those questions and try to answer them as well. Everyone good? We'll get started. So Rose, maybe we'll start with you. You know, I'm really curious at Philip Morris, you know, was remote work something that was new to you, you know, in the last year? Is it something that you've had to deal with in the past? And, you know, when COVID happened, how did you really approach, you know, remote work and how you were going to manage and tackle that?
Yeah, thank you, Alan. I think pre-pandemic, we really didn't have that much of what we would describe as a remote working population. There were small pockets that probably did work in some form of hybrid working or remote working through real personal agreements with line managers, not so much in the way of a formal setup. So I think the adaptation that everyone's gone through, and I think, you know, across the world, in every company across the world, there's been a big move and shunt across to remote working. It's been a little bit of try it and see, suck and see if it works, and move into that. Remarkably, I think the vast majority of employees and employers have adapted very well to it, and surprisingly well in a lot of circumstances. But it's not something that we had pre-pandemic, and therefore we have adapted to that as we've gone on.
Yeah. And sometimes, you know, I think a lot of people have just had no choice but to adapt. You know, put the computer on the dining table, and, you know, I have to work. We're in lockdown. You know, nowhere to go. Philippe, did you have experience of remote work before COVID happened in Germany with your organization?
Well, so given the fact that we as an organization are currently transforming into becoming a tech organization, I think remote working was something that was there before the pandemic. I think the cases that we had were usually driven by the fact that you have a very, very small group of talent that you need for a specific task. So they have a lot of power to tell you from where they want to work, right? And you usually comply with it because you know that you don't have a lot of choice. So we did have a remote workforce population, but of course, with the pandemic, the numbers spiked, which actually led to a situation that we had less ability to manage our remote workforce than we had before the pandemic, because of course, you know, we couldn't keep up from a resourcing perspective.
Right. And what do you think was the biggest challenge that you both faced when, everyone pivoted to remote work? What was the first thing that was, if you think of the list of priorities around remote work and all the different areas that people have to deal with, what were the kind of top 2 or 3 things that you felt, if I can get my head and my arms around solving these, then this is going to go a long way to helping us really manage remote work for the foreseeable future?
I think, go on.
Sorry, I think the logistical side of it, very much in terms of getting your technology working. I think if we all cast our minds back to March 2020, I think there was coming to terms with Teams, Zoom, all the very different avenues, and working out actually which one was going to work best for you as an organization and you as an individual using it. And I think there was a try it and see and test out the various different innovations and solutions that were available to make it work. And then once we settled on something, so in Philip Morris, we settled on Teams, that we would use Teams for our daily interaction, and then build everyone's not just their appetite, but also their experience and their ability to use it to good effect. So there was something around, let's build the technology to make it work for us. And then I don't think anyone, if we went back a few months prior to that, would have envisaged us spending, certainly not spending as much time on a video call as we did, but as actually having the ability to pivot to use it so much, so productively and so quickly. I think that's what surprised us all as well.
It's also getting used to the fact that you can see yourself in the video camera all day long. It's like staring at yourself in a mirror all day long. It's that can be quite disconcerting at times. Philippe, what about from your perspective?
I think we as an organization were quite well equipped technically to deal with the situation. What we learned is that it's a very, very different game to have 10 remote workers or 250. So we really struggled with the administrative side of it, right? When we approached our corporate finance department and told them, oh, by the way, we don't just need to recharge certain costs for 10 people, but we need to do it for 200. They plainly told us they can't do it, right? So from that point of view, I think we were very much overwhelmed with the administrative side of it. And of course, the topic as such is it's opening a can of worms, right? I think when you have 8 cases, you kind of have them set up. You feel comfortable that you're doing the right thing, and you have 2 cases, and the guy from the finance team has good relation with your auditors, and they say, yeah, that's good enough. Let's do it that way, right? And then when you have 250 cases, you can't do it that way anymore. And this is something that overwhelmed us and really cost us a lot of effort to make sure that we do the right things.
And I'm guessing that, based on that, not only was it perhaps a challenge just understanding where everyone was and what each person's scenario or situation was, because a lot of people were displaced initially, but, did you have any tools in place at the time that even facilitated those types of remote working requests, or, was it all just coming in via email? Were you faced with that kind of overwhelming, my email box is out of control, I'm trying to manage things in Microsoft Excel, I don't even know partly of all the things that I've got to think about because I keep thinking of new things. Was it that kind of instant feeling of being overwhelmed initially?
Yeah, certainly from our perspective, in terms of your international assignee population, if you have any form of technology that tracks them ordinarily, then you have a means of you suspect where everybody is, but there was actually the physical process of calling everybody up and establishing where people were and then tracking them. Then when you look at the broader population, so you have your whole domestic local population, and in a company like ours you've got 70,000 plus employees, that's a very different kettle of fish, a very different scenario to have to deal with, and trying to establish where people are, or people calling you or emailing you, like you say, to say, I'm now sat in another country, I'm sat in Spain, I'm a Swiss employee, I'm sat in Mexico, I'm a Brazilian employee. Trying to coordinate where all of those people were. We didn't have a tool in place, we didn't have a tracker. We were trying very quickly to adapt and deal with a tsunami of information that was coming towards us, and then trying to balance, how do you work out which is the critical cases that you need to deal with because they have a need, and also there's a risk, either personal risk, security risk, tax risk, corporate tax, all of these different things. And what are the logistics around it as well? Certainly as we went through the pandemic, there were travel restrictions in place. And although we might have, from a corporate perspective, wanted to have people back in their proper location, actually it was physically impossible to move them at the time. So we didn't have a tool in place. We still don't, but we acknowledge we need to get something that will help us better place where our employees are at all times.
And did you find that the scope of what mobility was being asked to manage and look after expanded beyond the traditional, because you've got some experience of cross-border issues, or were you able to pull together cross-functional teams where everyone came together and said, okay, as a collective team, we've got to try to solve this problem? Philippe, how did it work within your organization from that perspective? Was it all kind of down to one or two people, or was there a sort of collective drive to approach it with a certain methodology, if you will, even if you didn't have...
I think in the beginning, things were just thrown over the fence to mobility, right? They said, oh, this is a kind of cross-country thing, so let's just give it to mobility. And of course, we realized quickly that the issues that you're facing are so multi-dimensional that you, as a small mobility team, you can't take care of it yourself, right? And especially the finance aspect of it was something that had a strong focus for us, right? Because we needed to make sure that we mitigate all the risks as much as possible. So it actually increased collaboration with our finance team quite significantly. And I think it also increased our understanding of how money flows within the company, so to say. So I think this was an upside, but I think the starting point basically almost in every case was mobility, because they just said, hey, it's an employee from country A being in country B, and this was all they needed to say, shift it to mobility.
I think everyone I've spoken to has been through that same experience where mobility really got an opportunity to shine in many ways and show their value, which I think is, one of the positives of all the extra hours that everyone did during that period. You've both talked about the kind of compliance issues, and if we look at where we are now, we're a year, maybe 15 months into this whole thing from when the first lockdown happened. Do you feel as though you've got a handle now on the compliance issues around remote work, or for the population that you were dealing with? Do you feel as though you've got over that crunch of what was the immigration stuff, what was the PE stuff, what was the tax stuff that we had to deal with? Do you feel in a better place now in terms of knowing what your risks are and, being on top of the compliance related to those?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it took a while to get the attention of everybody. And as Philippe mentioned, the finance lens, the corporate tax lens, transfer pricing, personal tax, social security, immigration, there was all these different pillars. And it felt a challenge at the beginning to get everybody on board that this needed a cross-stakeholder, a cross-functional team to work on this. And what we've done at Philip Morris is put together through a working party where there was each of us, so to speak, and me from Global Mobility representing my team who had been dealing with a lot of this on more of an ad hoc basis than we should really have done given the size. And now we've pulled them together, and we've actually pulled together a governance committee, and we've drafted a governance framework to be able to deal with all of these different scenarios. And we've actually, built a decision tree and all of this that we would like to use going forward to put it in perspective. So to answer your question, yes, we've got a handle around the compliance. Now it's how do we take that forward and manage it going forward? Because as we all start to drift back to offices, hybrid ways of working, however we may set it up in the future, wherever we are in the world, we still need to maintain that tracking in some ways, because we're still going to have people that are dislocated, either out of choice or out of circumstances.
And do you have a sort of philosophy that you're applying about, how you want to approach remote working going forward from a governance or policy perspective? I'll come on and talk in a second, or ask you in a second about, what your future prediction is on remote work. But as you pivot from maybe those core compliance issues to the other areas of remote work that you're looking at, and talking about maybe developing a remote work policy or a governance framework, what are some of the other kind of considerations beyond the compliance or the philosophical approach that you're taking? If I'm going to get these requests coming in, is there a way of thinking about them that I'm really trying to approach it from? And Philippe, I know that perhaps in GFK, excuse me, keep having JFK on the mind. In GFK, how do you approach philosophically, if you've got a case of someone working in Spain who's an Australian, what are you trying to achieve there?
Well, as said, I think we were exposed to the topic even pre-pandemic, right? Because we had these very specific skill sets that we needed from employees, and therefore we needed to be a little bit more flexible in terms of place of work, right? What we have done from a general perspective is really ask ourselves, is it worth it? Because I think you will always have cases where employees have such a specific skill set that they can basically ask you to employ them wherever they want to be, right? But from a broader perspective, the hoops that you got to jump through, right? The things that you have to initiate to make sure that people can work abroad, so to say, for a job that is not necessarily located abroad. I think we are really kind of questioning whether this comes with a benefit for the organization. And I think we are very flexible when it comes to remoteness within borders. So we are going away even from the hybrid model. If you want to stay home your entire work time, you can, etc. But the cross-country thing, I think it's not going to be overly open to everyone. Let's put it that way.
Selfishly, can I ask how you might approach the US, where within the US, for example, it's such a vast place with so many different states? Do you sort of view it as almost a domestic type issue as opposed to something that is cross-state border?
Yeah. So we actually looked into that. In the US, pre-pandemic, 45% of our employees already worked from home.
Wow.
Yes. And in the end, maybe that's a very general statement, but our headquarters in the US is in New York City. And if you hire someone in Michigan, they can't fly that often to New York to actually spend more money that we would need to pay them being a New York City employee.
Exactly.
So,
trust me, I used to be in New York and I've moved to Maine, so I know the feeling.
Yeah. No, but this is the thing. So for us, I mean, we took a very economical decision to be extremely flexible in the US when it comes to home office, right? Because we did some check-ins, we looked at travel costs, etc., and we realized that salary levels in New York are so out of control that it's cheaper to hire people, as I said, in, Michigan and Nevada and all these places, and have them flying into New York once a month.
Yeah. And Rose, what about within PMI? Has there been a sort of overarching philosophy about, how you've developed that framework that you were talking about?
Yeah, there is. So we have global guidelines where the intent is that as we start to go back to the office, that there will be a hybrid model, so that our employees have the option to work from home for a portion of the week, maybe 3 days a week and 2 days in the office. So that is the overarching global guidelines. The intent is that people, however, when they work remotely, they work in the country of employment or the country of assignment. We are not looking to have individuals that continue to work from a third location potentially for a long duration. We're saying that if you need to be across a border, then we can allow for maybe up to 8 weeks in a year, but that's it. And most people would probably apply that to either end of a holiday or a vacation time somewhere. Maybe they have a holiday home and they want to spend a week or so either side of their working time on that. The intent, a little bit like Philippe is saying, is to enable employees to work absolutely anywhere in the world is just going to be a minefield to try and manage from a corporate perspective and from tax and making sure that you're treating employees fairly as well, and managing even in things that people probably don't think about, like medical insurance. You have your medical insurance plan attached to your country of employment. If you go and sit in another country, it's invalid. So there's lots of complexity that maybe we didn't initially think about when this balloon came up and we all said, oh, everybody can work from anywhere. Well, the reality is actually, it's much, much harder to manage than we might have initially thought.
Yeah. So kind of moving to the future a little bit, I've watched with interest how the pendulum has been swinging over the last 9 months or so. All the tech companies immediately came out and said, anyone can work from anywhere on a full-time basis ongoing, and everyone kind of jumped on that bandwagon. And then probably in the last 3 months or so, we're seeing a lot of direction back to, we want to get people back in the office as soon as possible, particularly in the finance community, in the banks, etc. And I'm personally not sure where that pendulum is going to land right now. I suspect it's going to be somewhere in the middle. From your perspective, do you think that remote working of some form is here to stay? And if so, what do you think that looks like? And my twist on the question is, what should we call it? You hear about displaced work, distributed work, remote work, hybrid work. What should we call this thing that we're going to be dealing with on an ongoing basis? That's the harder question.
Well, I can answer that one straight away because we've already named it.
Okay. Lead us.
So we've entitled it Smart Work.
Oh, I like that.
That's how Philip Morris has approached it. It's smart work. And smart work is a combination of, it's actually ways of working. So it's, is it a hybrid model in and out of the office? Can you, depending on your job and your actual role, can you be in and out of the office? Can you spend 2 days, 3 days in the office, 2 days, 3 days at home? Does your actual role enable you to do that? Yeah. And I think for us, it's how do you grow into that model going forward in the future, and how do you, enable employees to find the right balance, working with their line managers, working in their role, working with the tools that they have to operate both at home and in the office. How do you create your office space to support individuals that are not going to spend 5 days a week in the office instead, and build your facilities around that as well. So it's trying to work out how all of this pieces together, and the employees still feel very valued, and that they feel as if they're part of a team, and making sure you keep the connection so that you have collaboration as well when they go into the office, and people don't feel as if they're too distant.
And sorry, just as a follow-up there, would you make this available to all employees, or only certain job roles that really are suited to having a hybrid type arrangement where they could work from home a certain number of days, office-based a certain number of days?
Yeah, I mean, the intent is it's on offer to all employees that are office-based employees that are actually not part of a manufacturing setup where they need to be. Obviously, if we're running equipment in a manufacturing setup, it's very different. We need our employees to be there to manage that for us. But certainly across the office space, we would anticipate that this should be available to as many as possible.
Perfect. And Philippe, what's your prediction for the future based on from where you're sitting today? You know, do you see some form of smart hybrid working on an ongoing basis?
Well, I think you know, as I said, within a country, I think it's a given. It's going to stick, right? I think it's going to stay, and only very few companies will be going back to full office time, right? I mean, if you do a shared desk policy, if you have offices in Tokyo, New York, London, Paris, and I don't know, other cities, just do the math, right? If you only have to keep 50% of the desks, it's going to be a huge saving. So that's the one aspect. And I think within a country, it's going to stay. I think the international remote working thing, that's going to stay problematic, because what we are seeing, unfortunately, is that legal regulations are becoming more and more complex rather than less complex. Yeah. Countries have not shown any interest in helping companies to comply with the wishes of the employees, right? So I think internationally it's going to be difficult. I mean, in another session today, we talked about global employment company and all these kind of things, but I do not foresee that it's going to be significantly easier over the course of the next, let's say, 5 years.
Perfect. And Rose, we've got a question that's come in. You know, you mentioned that you're going to allow up to potentially 8 weeks of remote work across borders. Are you going to take compliance steps for those 8 weeks, or are you comfortable with the risk for that time abroad?
Yes,
this is a great question, really.
No, it's a great question, and it's actually something we've thought through. We've been wrestling with it, and the 8 weeks we've come up with as a generalization for across the globe, and it's based on advice from our tax advisors and our corporate tax team and our finance team. That's not to say absolutely everybody will get granted 8 weeks. So what we're expecting our employees to do is to apply via their line manager and then through to the governance committee, and we will consider if they want to work a week either side of a holiday. We're not so worried. If there's a reason they want to be out of country for 8 weeks, we will want to know what's the circumstances, what's the country combination, and there will be an assessment done. So yes, absolutely, we will be. It's not just a broadsheet, off you go, you can go anywhere in the world. Yeah, there is actually a compliance angle to it. We will do an assessment and say whether it's valid or not.
Great. And we've got about 2 minutes left, so I have a final question for you both. You know, if you had to do it all over again, and God willing, we don't have to do it all over again, what's the one thing that you would want to have in place that would make it's so much easier for you to deal with going forward in the future? Philippe, I'll start with you.
Yeah, well, I think, you know, don't take this too serious, please. But I think what would be great if we could just kind of implant an RFID chip into our employees and have scanners, you know, at the entries of the offices, because then we would actually know where everyone is, right? What we learned in the pandemic, that we had not known that some people were in other offices for months, right? Which of course was caused by the fact that we were quite a remote organization already. So it uncovered the issues of being a remote organization, because you know, bosses didn't know where their teams were. They didn't know whether they were home or in London or in Barcelona, right? So I think but from a serious point of view, I think having a better tracking capability would be important.
Yeah. And Rose, do you want biometric implants?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, I think I have over the past year probably said that myself a couple of times. It just chip everybody, and then we'd know where they are. But I think, yeah, a tool, some form of tracking tool, any extension of short-term business visitors, or we need to establish a tool so that we can do assessments as well quite quickly without having to do actual speaking to individual teams. If we can build that into a system, it'd be much quicker.
Perfect. Well, you know, I've really enjoyed this afternoon's session. I've learned so much from you both, as always. I really appreciate you both taking the time to chat with me this afternoon about remote work, and I like that RFID chip. And you know, that's something that maybe I don't think the future is that far away, to be honest. So I wish you both a great evening. Thanks to Alex and the team at the GME for hosting this event, and wishing everyone who's listening in a great rest of your day. So thank you.